Many of us are not sure what to make of our new MAGA culture, especially in our Christian circles. Friends we have worshiped with in church, been in small groups with, and have prayed with are now enmeshed in a movement that believes that Christians should take over America, making it what they believe it was founded to be, a Christian nation. To them, it makes perfect sense that Jesus, as Lord of all, should be able to be the Lord of America as well. According to what they've been told, the vast majority of the founding fathers were Bible-believing, church-attending Christians.
So our guest today is Caleb Campbell. He's the pastor of Desert Springs Bible Church in Phoenix, Arizona. We will be discussing his book titled Disarming Leviathan, Loving Your Christian Nationalist Neighbor. Caleb believes that while it's possible to be both a Christian and hold Christian nationalist ideas, Christian nationalism itself is an unchristian worldview.
What's fascinating is that Caleb does not see our calling as being argumentative or combative with people who tend to believe that we should fight to make America a Christian nation, but rather to see them as people who have believed a false gospel of power. Therefore, he says that we should see ourselves as missionaries to Christian nationalists, reaching out to them with the love and freedom of Jesus Christ.
Bob, this is kind of a tough conversation. It's
Yep.
uncomfortable. And because of that, Bob and I understand that this can be a difficult conversation for some of our listeners, and that many of us may be offended by what Caleb Campbell is actually saying. But we ask that you try to listen with an open heart, as Bob and I are trying to do. This is a contentious time in our society, and it's so divisive. So the goal of this episode is to talk about how we can bring God's love and peace into what can be very heated issues.
Interestingly, we recorded the first part of this interview back on August 29th, 2025. This was before the assassination of one of the leading voices of Christian American nationalism, Charlie Kirk. In light of that devastating event, we thought we'd revisit with Caleb and get his thoughts. So the first part of this interview is from last year, and the second part is from this year. Here is our interview with Caleb Campbell. Thanks for being on the Reading and Great podcast, Caleb.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Let's start with your story, a
Sure.
story that many of us have experienced, especially in the past 10 years, of how you saw people become more strident about their political issues and how you suffered relational fallout because of it in your church and in your friendships.
Yeah. I have been at this church since 2001, Desert Springs Bible Church in Phoenix, Arizona. Met the Lord here, came on staff in '06, became the lead pastor in 2015, within weeks of now President Trump announcing his candidacy. And I just did not have this stuff on my radar. Like, I thought I knew what I was getting into. Historically, our congregation had been publicly apolitical, never endorsed candidates from the pulpit, rarely, if ever, spoke directly to political issues. And so, as an evangelical suburban, Bible church, we had generally been welcoming to any political, party, anyone who adheres to that, and had actually at the time been making some intentional efforts to see socioeconomic and ethnic diversity within our leadership team that's better reflective of the area. So those were initiatives that started in the early 2010s. So by
So,
the time
so, so let me stop you there. So before the issues arise, you are a white suburban evangelical church in Phoenix, but then you saw we're not actually in a white area. There's diversity here, so you consciously try to bring in ethnicity of what Hispanic and Black people into leadership.
Yeah, including an Indian. So we have a large Indian population in North Phoenix, as well as all of. Phoenix is a city of transplants. The metro area has quadrupled in my lifetime.
Mm.
So when I was born, it was I think it was 1.8 million people in Phoenix Metro, and it's now 4.5. and growing. And those are old numbers too. That's maybe 4 years old numbers. So the socioeconomic and ethnic diversity of North Phoenix, if you just go 3 miles to our east, is Kierland, which is a district in Scottsdale, which is one of the most affluent cities in the country. You have 3 miles west of us, it's Palomino, the northernmost impoverished district in Phoenix.
Mm.
Uh, Years ago, if people remember, some of the Sudanese Lost Boys, I think this is like 25 years ago, were resettled just down the road from us. And so we've been involved in ministry in the broader community, but we recognized in that season that, by and large, we were a homogenous bunch and had made intentional decisions to diversify our leadership team and get real intentional about like who's on stage, who's leading, who defers to who, all that. And that was, 2011, 2012, we were doing that. Is huge and big value for me. And so when it became clear that probably I was going to step in the lead pastor role, we stayed the course. And, we talk about immigration, we talk about care for refugees, we talk about racism, we talk about, classism as well, which is an often underexplored issue in the church. And by and large, 2013, 2014, early 2015, you do the sermon and that people would think this is great. The Bible does talk about racism. The Bible does talk about immigration, refugees, et cetera, et cetera. And after I stepped in the lead pastor role, we'd talk about those same things, not all the time, but when they come up in scripture. And I started getting pushback, like weird pushback. It was weird to me because these are people who I've shared communion with for, at the time, over 15 years. And, they're accusing me of a liberal agenda, atheism. I got accused of being an atheist, accused of Marxism and a demonic spirit. And these things were around issues around immigration, refugee, not endorsing a candidate from the stage was viewed as secretly being a plant for the other team.
Mm.
And I remember thinking like, what is going on? And it was kind of this steady stream from 16 to 20. By the time 2020 hits, I mean, it's just in full effect. And so, we made the decision on Friday, the 13th of March of 2020. I remember that day because I spent 16 hours on the phone trying to, discern are we going to meet or not on Sunday, and made the decision not to. And so we switched to online and led through that. And then, of course, Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, there's in sequence their deaths and public the news hitting. We would speak to those and lament and cries for justice. But that summer, a lot of accusations. People were calling, texting, printing packets of stuff and leaving it on my doorstep, accusing me of, all this stuff that I mentioned before. And it was at a fever pitch. And I was so disoriented because I'm like, we're doing the same stuff we've been doing, at least in my mind, in my imagination. And as I look back on it, we were very blessed because our board, our leadership team, we were in lockstep that whole time. But many of the congregants were not. And in hindsight, I realized I was assuming that the absence of conflict was the presence of unity. That because in 2015, I was not seeing a lot of conflict when we did these sermons on immigration or racism or whatever, that what that meant was I interpreted that to mean, oh, we're all on the same page. And we were not on the same page. I just couldn't see it. I was naive and ignorant to the fact that I was in a different place and our leadership team was in a different place than many people in our congregation. And what the MAGA movement did was it gave permission for people in the congregation and across the country to, for lack of a better phrase, say the quiet part out loud. Now I can say that your position on caring for immigrants is ungodly because there's a movement of people that I've found who are saying those things, or, that racism doesn't exist, or that, eventually that CRT is, that any conversation about race is critical race theory, and I can dismiss that out of hand. And so this movement started to build momentum. And It tore through our congregation. It tore through families. By the end of 2020, 80% of the congregation that was there in 2016 had left. At the
Mm,
same
mm,
time,
mm.
in that period, a handful of churches started explicitly promoting American Christian nationalism, partnering with an organization that's 3 miles down the street from me, Turning Point USA, and hosting large events that conflate a lot of Christianity with certain aspects of the MAGA movement and certain aspects of, uh, what has sometimes been called conservatism, although I don't think it is conservative. And as that was happening, and the volume on the culture war stuff really got turned up in these churches. A lot of those churches went from a couple hundred people to thousands, and they're kind of all over the valley now. And so that shook me awake, so to speak, to the fact that something is going on here that's more than just an issue, people being mad about an issue. There's some kind of movement. And so that got me interested in trying to figure out what was going on in the broader community here.
And so what did you do? You started researching.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out what was going on, especially the other side of January 6, 2021. Uh, the phrase Christian nationalism started popping up. And I thought, okay, well, maybe that's a way to talk about this phenomenon. So it's not a perfect way to talk about it. I call it the American Christian Nationalist movement because it's more than a political ideology. A lot of people restrict the term Christian nationalism to just a political ideology. What I'm trying to do is view this from a missional lens or a missiological lens, like as if I'm a missionary to this community. And I see it much more than just a political ideology. There's a movement. And so I kind of sensed it back then. I wouldn't have articulated it that way. And so I just started going to as many of these events and gatherings as I could. It's convenient for me. I'm in Phoenix, Arizona. There's a ton of Christian nationalist gatherings and by the way, I want to be clear, where they are explicitly saying Christian nationalism is a good thing.
They weren't saying Christian nationalism is a good thing. This is a Christian nationalist convention. They're saying we're going to get America back for God or these kinds of phrases, right?
Yeah, yeah. Take America back for God. America was founded as a Christian nation, and we need to take it back from the bad guys, whoever it is. Um, and so I went to as many of these gatherings as I could because I wanted to figure out what was going on underneath, like beyond the
Right.
YouTube rhetoric and beyond the social media posts, like on the ground, what are people caring about? And in 2021, and for a couple of years, went to as many of these guys. I went to the first Turning Point USA Pastors Conference in 2022 and hung out with a bunch of, I think it was 500 pastors that were there. So I got to hang out with them. Because again, I'm trying to discern like what is drawing people into this movement? What do they care about? What are they afraid of? What are their hopes and dreams? How do they see their faith in Jesus mixing with what's going on here? And so that's what I did. I went about the process of studying it as if I was as if I was going into a mission field because I wanted to understand the culture.
Yeah, I think the church and so much of society has changed since 2020. I think there's just a lot that happened that, like you said, say the quiet stuff out loud and feel comfortable in numbers. Um, and so I don't know, for the people who maybe we've already lost a chunk of audience of saying like, oh no, just another liberal podcast talking about
Yeah, right.
this. But hopefully, the people listening can listen to this conversation with an open mind because it's an important conversation to have no matter what side, quote unquote, if there are sides like that you're on here.
Yeah.
But the even the title of your book might make people scratch their heads, right? Like disarming Leviathan. Um, so I wanted to ask you, what is Leviathan? Why do you call Christian nationalism this? What does that mean?
Yeah, great question. And to your point about like depending on what side you're on, Christian nationalism is not inherently conservative. In the 1970s, there was a movement called Black Christian Nationalism, and a lot of the policies that they advocated for, we would today say were progressive. Around the world, there's Christian nationalist movements that are vying for or jockeying for positions that in America today we would say are progressive. So it's not inherently conservative. It just so happens right now in America, it's tethered to what we call the conservative party. Although personally, I don't think it is conservative. It's a power move. And American Christian nationalism as an ideology is the idea that Christians should take government power to protect and propagate their way of being in the world. And it's not about Christians influencing, government in a democratic republic. It's the taking of power for their own sake that is the fatal flaw. And this idea of taking by sometimes by means of force, taking in order to promote or propagate, my people, my way at the expense of others. In scripture, you see this over and over again, that this leads to chaos and destruction. It's operating out of a scarcity mindset, a zero-sum game mindset, we want a king for us mindset. And so throughout scripture, you see how that posture of, we need to take power for ourselves, the effect of that leads to chaos, destruction. And one of the ways to talk about chaos evil in the Bible is through these animal-like beasts. For instance, the Leviathan. So Job, the Psalms, for instance, popularly use the Leviathan to talk about this ancient chaos dragon that lives in the disordered, watery abyss, kind of underneath the pillars of the earth. But you also get beastly language, like when, of course, probably one of the most famous is the serpent in the garden. It's this beast-like figure that kind of like, where did it come from? I'm of the mind that the original hearers of that would have been like, oh, we know what this is. This is a chaos beast that's come up from the disordered realm that's contrary to the ordered ways of God. When Cain is meditating on killing his brother Abel, Yahweh says to Cain, if you're not careful, sin is crouching at your door. So that language of crouching like a predatory beast. Peter talks about the Satan prowling around like a hungry, hunting, roaring lion, seeking to devour. And so one of the ways the biblical authors talk about chaos evil is this predatory beast-like creature. In the book of Revelation, you get probably, again, one of the more famous ones, a dragon and a beast. And so I understand the biblical authors to be leveraging that imagery to help describe or talk about the force or power that is the temptation to take power for myself, for my own ends, for my own way. And so that's the primary reason, is I think the biblical imagery is a rich and nuanced and really, really thoughtful, multi-layered understanding of what chaos, evil, and the temptation is. The other thing too, Gregory the Great was a bishop in the 6th century, and he was commentating on Job, and he's got this line that I think is brilliant where he says, the Leviathan never presents itself as evil to righteous people. To people who want to do good, it always presents itself as good. And that commentary really helped me see like, oh, right, like evil never present to people who want to do good, godly people who want to be godly. Evil never presents as God. It always presents as an angel of light. And it's just a slight, almost all of it sounds good, but then there's this slight deviation, and you can kind of smell it because it's about self-preservation and self-advancement over others and at the expense of others. And I see that in the temptation of Jesus in the desert, that the tempter comes, and the things that Jesus is tempted with are not bad things, but the means by which he's to gain those things, that's the problem, because it means dominating over other people to get them. And then my third reason to answer your question directly is it's so cool. Like it sounds like a heavy metal album,
There you
right?
go.
Disarming Leviathan. So probably that's actually the first reason in my own heart, but I like to start with the Bible and then get you to heavy metal.
Yeah, the beast in Revelation is like a deceiver. It's like it deceives all these people into thinking this is the way it's supposed to be. I'm Jesus, or I'm. It's like wow. And Revelation. We had Scott McKnight on a podcast not too long
Yeah.
ago,
Yeah, Scott's great.
and it's like Revelation is like the most politically charged book in the entire Bible. This is Babylon. This is Rome is Babylon, and Scott was like, we have to start asking the question, where do we see Babylon in our society?
Yeah.
What is it that we need to rise up against and say that right there, that's Babylon. What are we going to do about that?
Yep.
And
Yeah.
what I'm hearing from you is you said this is that not a call for confrontation or debate or combativeness. I hear the heart of a pastor of a missionary, right?
Yeah.
You want to reach people who are ensnared in a worldview that you think is harming them spiritually. But I know, and you know, probably many people who support Donald Trump who do so because they feel that the actual Leviathan that has gripped the country is liberal progressivism. All they want to do is get the country back to sanity. So
Yeah.
are you equating all of them with Christian nationalists, or is there some kind of spectrum on this?
Yeah, that's great. So Leviathan takes on many forms. So American Christian nationalism is one of myriad expressions of Leviathan's power, kind of like the Hydra. Um, yeah, you know what I'm talking about, like the multi-headed dragon. So imagine you're on a boat out on the ocean, and you see like seven heads up, like coming up from the water, and you think they're all different beasts. But if you go under the water and look, they're all one thing. And that's how I see like any movement that is powered by self-advancement, by dominating over others, is an expression of Leviathan power. It's an expression of that predatory, self-centered power that Scripture so frequently warns us against. So I see, because I'm up close and personal to American Christian nationalism today, I see it there. And I would just say, of course, it's everywhere else. My job is not to give an analysis of every expression of Leviathan's power, but just to focus on this one. And the reason why is because in this particular case, in my community, it's presenting itself as godliness. So one of the reasons why I'm concerned about American Christian nationalism today is people inside the movement and the rhetoric, the talk track, the advertisements, they think it's Christian. They think that this is the way of Jesus, that Jesus wants us to take government power to dominate over others in the name of the cross. And so, as a pastor and a missional pastor, who, I mean, I cut my teeth on Tim Keller and Leslie Newbegin and missiologists, Rene Padilla and others. And so, I'm thinking missionally about my own community, and I think, well, this is a counterfeit gospel. As it relates to folks who say, well, what about the liberals? What about the progressives? Hey, I'm not disagreeing. My argument is not, oh, American Christian nationalism is exhibiting Leviathan power, therefore we should all become secularists. And that's not my argument. My argument is, for those who take on the name of Jesus, be like Jesus in all of your actions, including your civic engagement. I mean, that would be, I guess, the root of it. And so if you're a conservative, be conservative, but be a conservative like Jesus. If you're going to be a Republican, great, be a Republican like Jesus. My concern with American Christian nationalism is it's more like Machiavelli than the Messiah, in that it's arguing the ends justify the means.
Mm.
I've been in the room where I've heard pastors say, we need to fight fire with fire. The other team is doing this, so we got to go low. We got to, punch back, and violent language too. I'm not hearing about the fruit of the Spirit when I go to these gatherings. There's an ethnocentrism in some of their ideology and rhetoric. There's a powering over. There's a militarism to it that's just contrary to the way of Jesus. So, to answer your question directly, what about the liberals? What about the progressives? I am not a liberal or a progressive, and so I'm reticent to critique a house that's not my own. I am of the mind, and maybe I'll change my mind, but I've been pushed on that before, and been thinking a lot about it. But I am of the mind that for the most part, the biblical prophets were yelling at their own people.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to take my cues from that. Like Paul talks about, like, I'm not here to judge the people outside the church. I'm here inside. And then he talks to his people. And so this is my people. This is my community. Like I come from a conservative people and I know it and I am it. And at the end of the day, I'm inviting people to pursue their what they believe to be their political convictions based on their understanding of who Jesus is, while also exhibiting the fruit of the Spirit. And also remembering that we are ambassadors of reconciliation, praying that our community would be reconciled to God. And if anything I do for a political end stands in the way of that, I've misordered my loves or my priorities or my allegiances.
Yeah, the goal is reconciliation, not to win a big argument, right?
Reconciliation, not domination.
Yeah.
And what I hear coming out of American Christian Nationalist circles is destroy the libs. Well, that is not missional language. That's, that's
Well, I mean,
war.
you hear the libs say destroy the conservatives, but you expect godless people to say things like that. It's fine. That's fine.
If a person worships Caesar and behaves like how Caesar tells him, great. Like that
That's
seems totally
expected.
normal.
Yeah.
My concern is people who take the name of Christ and then behave like Caesar.
And like, on this topic of one side wanting to attack the other side or put them in a box, the chapter titled Leviathan emerges. You identify three methods that Christian nationalists use that we should be on the lookout for. They distort God's word by quoting the Bible out of context. They create a us versus them narrative that makes them a group that is out to destroy us and our way of life. But the one that resonates with me the most is this one. And maybe it's because I work in marketing and specifically I'm a social media manager, so I see it a lot. um, but I think this is why this one sticks out to me is that they build their narrative on anxiety and rage.
Yeah.
We all see it no matter what you do for work, but um, of course I see, even atheist liberals leverage anxiety and rage about the issues they feel are dire as well, like climate change and LGBTQ plus equality. And like, there's so many things that, from both sides, we can use anxiety and rage. Politics always seem to revolve around anxiety and rage. But Christians, we should know better, like we're talking about. So we follow Jesus, who constantly told us, "Do not be afraid." How do you help people move away from this feeling of anxiety and anger,
Yeah.
and lean more into what Jesus says of "Do not be afraid"?
Yeah. There's a few different ways to get at this question. So let me try, and if you want to steer me in a different direction, do it. The first one that I'm thinking through is how do we create in our churches communities of peace? And what I mean by peace, I don't mean like not having conflict or arguments, but a peace or a restfulness that rests in the resurrection power of Christ and the finished work on the cross and the sureness that all things will be made right again. So I'm not talking about laxity or apathy, but by no means, but just that any of my action in the world, the Sunday school song, "He's got the whole world in his hands." That includes everything that's causing me anxiety right now.
Mhm.
And so communities of peace or restfulness, resting in that truth, we're invited to enter into the rest of God. Uh, and so within our communities, that are communities of Jesus people, are communities of that peaceful rest. Again, not that we're not active, we are. And certainly there's lament and sadness and fear and anger and all that stuff. But as a community, we're cultivating peaceful rest. So that would be one. And then inviting people to participate in it. I mean, one of the things for me is like we can talk all day. I'm interested in like, how are you feeling when you hear all this stuff? Like you go to this rally or you're on that YouTube channel. Like, how's your heart rate? What's your thought life? What's your prayer life? You spending great time with your kids and grandkids? Like entering into a community of peaceful rest that's anchored in the triune God is holistically healthy or can be holistically healthy.
I'm guilty of feeling the blood boil when I'm watching a video on TikTok or Instagram,
Oh, bro. I mean,
and
it works.
I can feel my heart racing, and I'm like, ah,
Yeah.
that's exactly what this video was supposed to do, and it worked. It
Yes.
happened.
It
But
worked on me. Uh, the other one would be inviting people to consider or reconsider how the scripture gives us wisdom to understand ourselves and our day. And here's what I mean. Uh, I believe my current thinking is that the Bible says that things are worse than you can possibly imagine. That like people are like, there's evil stuff happening. And your Bible's like, duh, I've been saying that all 66 books.
In the last
That things
days,
are
it's going to be awful. Yeah, that's what they said
It's horrible.
2,000
Like
years ago.
nothing, yep, nothing is firm, right? Like everything's collapsing. And I think that the biblical wisdom is that things are worse than you could ever imagine. And Jesus is more powerful and loving than you've ever imagined. And so don't be shook when you discover that there's evil people like doing evil things and corruption and decay and all this kinds of, like that lament it, be sad, be frustrated, be angry, but like the Bible's telling you so. God is not shocked. Two, we've got to constantly remind each other, yeah, yeah, but remember Easter. Like, yes, it's collapsing. Yes, it's horrible. Yes, those people with that agenda are doing a thing that's contrary to the teaching of Scripture. The Bible is not shocked. It's telling you that's what's going to happen. And yet, the Jesus people are people who are reminding ourselves that Easter is real, and we're going to live in light of that truth, as opposed to the false story that maybe other people are living. And we're going to invite them into this story, to live in light of the Easter story. And so those would be two key ways: is cultivating and then reminding that that the Bible gives us a profound wisdom to discern our times and know how to live today. Like the fruit of the Spirit, Paul wrote that to the church in Galatia under Rome.
Right.
Like I don't know how else like it was pretty rough.
so tell us, you mentioned in your book Aunt Betty. So tell us about who you call Aunt Betty, who that is, what does that mean?
So Aunt Betty is an amalgamation of people that I know. And so she's a character, but she is true, like multiple people put into one. And I used Aunt Betty to help the reader. I wanted the reader's heart to soften as they thought a little bit more deeply about what are the various pressures and influences on Aunt Betty's life that have led her to say the horrible thing out loud at the kid's birthday party. Um, and a few years ago, I mean, the number one question I was getting pastorally is, what do I do with my Aunt Betty, my Uncle Jim, my nephew, my daughter, my son, like these loved ones in my team? They're saying horrible things at the Thanksgiving dinner, the Fourth of July barbecue, like that scenario where I've got someone who has someone that they love dearly who's saying things in rage-filled and anxiety-ridden tones, and they're dismissive, derisive, demonizing, sometimes ethnocentric, sometimes racist, combative, and I've got somebody in our congregation who's like, what do I do? So I just started thinking about all the people I know and then trying to get underneath the question that people are asking, how could they possibly think that way? Right? So Aunt Betty, cousin Steve, your son, your daughter, your mom, your dad, they post something on the internet, on social, and you read it and you're just like, how could they possibly think this way? And so the Aunt Betty character was my attempt to show, look, there's probably like 50 different influences that are operating on her right now and have for the last 60 years that have gotten her to the point to where the thing that you find abhorrent, she thinks is great. And the reason why I did that was to humanize the people that we're talking about, because I did see so many people who are writing books about or thinking about or writing hit pieces on Christian nationalism is they were falling into the same temptation of those people, the monstrous, like sometimes derisive and dismissive language. And I wanted to humanize. And so Aunt Betty's a character that helps us think more deeply about the influences that are putting pressure on or shaping the people that we're talking to. That honestly, if all those same pressures were applied to me, I might be thinking that same way.
Okay, name some of those pressures. So,
Oh,
okay,
sure. Yeah,
Aunt
great.
Betty for 60 years has been living in
Yep.
America, been going to church,
Yep.
and this is the soups she drinks every day.
Yeah.
This is the water she swims in, and
Yeah.
you're like, of course she feels this way.
Yep. Yeah. So things like the conflation of Americana with Christian symbols. So at the church she's been going to for 60 years, there's an American flag next to the cross, and everyone thinks this is fine, normal. Every 4th of July, Memorial Day, Veterans Day, Sunday, they sing My Country 'Tis of Thee, right after singing Amazing Grace. In her hymn book, there's patriotic hymns. Uh, a lot of her leaders that she's watched on TV or bought their cassette tapes or whatever have talked about America as God's, that God's blessed America uniquely, or a city on a hill, that kind of rhetoric. Um, Language like, America has a special relationship with Israel because we protect Israel, and so God's blessing us uniquely. That's in that all the water. The conflation of big government with the Antichrist is in fictional novels that she reads, like the Left Behind series. Uh, Stores she goes to, like Hobby Lobby, have a lot of iconography and items that she purchases that mix God talk with Americana. And she was told and has icons of our founders being very devout religious men. Like she's got a picture of George Washington praying at Concord, and she thinks that's how it used to be. America used to be led by people who were religiously devout and loved the Lord, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, the people in her Sunday school class are feeling the same way, and the stories they tell all propagate those ideas. And so all those forces are coming to bear on her um, in the lived experience. Singing Amazing Grace on Sunday and singing My Country 'Tis of Thee at the baseball game on Monday are the same experience. They're religious experiences about devotion to things that are bigger than me, and somehow God is involved in all of that kind of stuff. And so when a leader now steps forward and starts using God talk and says, if my people who are called by my name will repent and confess their sins, I will turn to them and heal their land. And she's been hearing that for 50 years. And now it's in the mouth of a political leader who's advocating for American Christian nationalism. It's like, great. Crosses and American flags is great. This is a Christian country. Um, Big government is demonic, and those people want big government. And so the phrase democrats doesn't strike her as odd because, that imagination has been cultivated over time. Uh, and so the American Christian Nationalist movement stepped in and took the reins from the cultural movement of the religious right and the moral majority, and just ran with it.
So I love this Aunt Betty idea because this is a real person who we all know. It's like it's somebody that you're going to talk to at Thanksgiving, and it's someone who you are trying to reach with love and
Mhm.
not with you're not going to argue and browbeat someone
That's right.
that you love. She's your Aunt Betty. So it's like everybody is actually probably an Aunt Betty. This is a mission field, not
Hmm.
a field to destroy and to
Yes,
overcome.
that's right.
This is our mission field.
Thanks for coming back to record an extension of our original interview with you. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
I was actually editing the recording of that podcast that we recorded with you last year when David texted me and informed me that Charlie Kirk was shot.
Mm.
Such a terrible thing that happened.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it was unfortunately everywhere on social very quickly. And yeah, so as soon as I saw it, I shared it with Bob and we talked about it. And, in a sense, kind of just mourn for our nation at this
Mhm.
point of where we were at. Just felt disgusted inside of just everything. But anyway, as Bob and I were talking about this podcast episode, we decided to shelve the episode until the dust kind of settled and then record this part in light of that assassination.
Mhm.
Um, Charlie Kirk is now seen as a Christian martyr, having died in the good work of spreading the gospel to college campuses. The naive combination of Christianity with American nationalism is still embraced by so many people, and even more so now that they see the need to continue the fight that Charlie started. So, starting off the bat with a long, difficult question, um, what is the proper loving response to that mentality of continuing the fight?
So, as with most conversations, it really depends on where the my counterpart is coming from. And for instance, there are some folks for whom Charlie Kirk is a person they've just become acquainted with recently through YouTube video clips, things like that. For others, they maybe were following Turning Point for years prior. And so, continuing a fight, we just would want to ask questions like, tell me what that means to you. What part of the fight do you think is valuable? How do you understand that to be taking place today? Just to get away from the talk track into actual values
Hmm.
and help to discern, that person just used the language of continue a fight, but that's obviously connected to some kind of value system underneath and trying to get to that value system by asking, tell me a story about that. Why is this something that you would dedicate so much time to? I'm curious, to know, because I know that you're a person who, cares about others. So why this way? And then I might invite them to think about how the way of Jesus might guide us as it relates to pursuing those values. So for instance, the person might say, well, I want to continue the fight because we need to take our country back or make Christianity popular again in America, or we want to continue the fight to make sure that America has Christian values. So those are, I think most of those are good desired ends. The question I might invite them into is the means by which Jesus has instructed us to go about those ends. So we want a righteous community. Awesome. Does Jesus have anything to say to us about how we pursue righteousness in the community? Um, how we might engage with people who are in positions of power that don't agree with us, or the broader body politic who may or may not agree with this. What should be our posture towards that? And then to ask questions like, what teachings of Jesus are guiding you as you think about fighting the good fight? What does that look like? And just trying to reintroduce Jesus back to the conversation for folks.
I love the answer to that is kind of asking more questions to them of saying, trying to get to the root of it
Mm-hmm.
behind that. So I think that that's important. Um, after the assassination, and like I said, it was everywhere online, and it really created just more of a discourse, more of a division online.
Yeah.
Um, and in my mind, there was already fuel on the fire, and then this just exponentially made it grow and made Turning Point and their vision larger in the minds of many, many people. A live stream memorial service. I mean, there was just so much. I hate to use the word buzz around it, but that's kind of what it felt like. And because there was just so much online culture surrounding this, I began to see so much like imagery being used with. with Christian nationalism. I mean, I would see imagery of Charlie Kirk being created, or the most recent one of the AI imagery of Trump as a Jesus figure with angels behind him. The AI imagery posted on True Social. So I'm just curious of your thoughts on that kind of imagery that Christian nationalism uses. Uh, what might be some of the purpose behind that? And then again, how do we respond to somebody using this imagery that kind of walks on that border of blasphemy
Yeah.
at times?
Yeah, the iconography and imagery are value communication tools. So they're usually designed to communicate things that I value. So if I have a bumper sticker, a t-shirt, a necklace, a tattoo, the iconography is, or a social media post, the iconography is trying to communicate a value system or something that I want to be known for or that I stand behind. Mixing or syncing Christian iconography with other icons generally has the effect of taking or borrowing some of the power from Christianity and then placing it in the sphere of the other imagery. So, for instance, when you take a cross and you wrap it in an American flag, it diminishes the value of the cross by making it ethnocentric or at least nations, government centric. And it seeks to elevate the flag. So it seeks to add some value to the flag that it takes power from one and puts it in the other.
Mm.
So the cross would be a symbol of an international faith for the cosmic king. And when you put a national symbol on top of it, it takes that power and merges it with or pushes it towards the national symbol. And so it's sending a values message. For instance, I have seen German crosses that were given to mothers who lost multiple sons in World War II. And in the center of the cross is a swastika. So the cross is a symbol that I would gladly take on to myself because it's international, it's the cosmic king. And yet they put a swastika on it. Now I find that to be repulsive. The swastika repulses me. However, for the mom that received that in 1937, whatever it was, that synced up her probably Lutheran faith, the value that she placed in her sons and their valiant death, at least in her mind, and the symbol of the swastika was all synced up. It all worked together for that person. I can imagine that the recipient of that token that mixed those icons together felt maybe comforted or proud, but definitely felt like they were okay going together. Whereas I feel like you should never mix those things. And so that would even be a bit of coaching I would have, or at least curiosity for someone who does conflate those images or merge the icons of, Americana with Christianity. Does that work around the world? Do Christians in Japan or do Christians in Sudan, do Christians in Iran, when they see a cross by itself, do they feel different than when they see a cross wrapped in an American flag? And you can just tell then, okay, so this is taking power from one and putting it to the other. And so my coaching for folks would be, what do you think this is accomplishing when we mix these things together? And secondly, are these on par with each other? Sometimes I'll be in sanctuaries or chapels where next to there'll be a cross and then an American flag and sometimes like a Christian flag, which I'm always struck by. Why is there a Christian flag? But let's say that and they're equitable. They're at the same height. Is that what we mean to communicate? That our Americanness and our Christianness are of equitable power to us, or not? And imagery has a way of trying to mix identity markers, values, and often the negative effect is that diminishes the image or the value of the cross.
People are doing that consciously, trying to diminish the cross. They think they're doing something brave and noble, pastors aren't even thinking that. I don't think it's like they put an American flag on the platform and a cross and a Christian flag, and they haven't even thought about the iconography, the message that's subliminally being sent. They haven't even thought through that, I don't think.
Yeah, I think many have inherited a culture. I mean, that really, to my understanding, the American flag started showing up in a lot of worship centers during the Cold War
Sure.
to signify American Christian USSR atheist. And those things got conflated. I do know that we saw "In God We Trust" added to the currency, and then "One Nation Under God" added to the pledge in the 50s as part of that. And again, in that case, the God talk is trying to shore up a tribal identity to distinguish ourselves from, in this case, the USSR.
Those godless communists, and
Right.
we're the God-fearing Americans that are fighting
Yeah.
that evil. And
And you
so,
also had lots of folks who went to church to signal, "I'm one of us." I mean, to my understanding, per capita, the height of church attendance in America was the Cold War era, especially the earlier days, kind of Eisenhower era. And you could wonder what motivated a person to get up out of bed on a Sunday morning and go to church. For some, it's devotion to the Lord, it's the congregation, it's the value of the community. And yet for others, it's, I need to get my butt in there because I'm a member of this community. And if I don't show up to church, they might start thinking I'm a commie. And so you could see how, especially during the era where your neighbor is ratting out neighbor for being communist, you could see why church attendance would be so important. And I think we're seeing something similar today where there are other reasons than Jesus or his communion of saints that a person would go to a church. There are folks who seem to be, I mean, I'm aware of one local megachurch that said that their partnership with the MAGA movement is their church growth strategy because people come for the politics and then they stay for the Jesus. Which Jesus they stay for, I don't know. But
right.
there is certainly today a motivation for some to be part of church communities because of their political posture.
Right. Evangelical no longer is a theological category, but a political category. And so it's now a political statement, but then it's also a growth strategy because I do see a lot of Christians in the Christian nationalist sphere saying, hey, look at all the people who are going to church because of us. Isn't that great? Right.
Yeah.
And it's like hard to argue that, except for the fact that, the question is who's the Jesus that they're meeting? And since we originally recorded that episode, the original episode, President Trump obviously has gone to war with Iran. And so the president, the Secretary of Defense, he likes to call himself the Secretary of War. He's constantly framing this war as sanctioned by God, repeatedly invoking God's almighty providence and expressing certainty that we're on God's side, that the U.S. military is God's side. He recently prayed, I'm going to quote this. It's astonishing to me. This was a prayer he prayed. Let every round find its mark against the enemies of righteousness and our great nation. Give them overwhelming violence of action against those who deserve no mercy. Let justice be executed swiftly and without remorse, that evil may be driven back and wicked souls delivered to the eternal damnation prepared for them. Yikes. And there's no doubt that an American Tomahawk missile tore through the classrooms of that elementary school in Iran, ripping apart the bodies of 120 school children and 36 adults. So as a Christian, I am appalled by all of this. I am appalled. And yet, again, those who've been captured by this Leviathan of Christian nationalism, somehow, I don't know how, but somehow they find this all to be just fine. Biblical, righteous. I just want to scream. I have to believe that this is some kind of demonic deception. But you're telling me, Caleb, you're pulling me back off the side of the cliff because I need to lovingly reach these people in need of the true gospel, the Prince of Peace, Jesus. So in your book, there's a section called the Field Guide to Responding to American Christian Nationalists, and you have this loose structure for such conversations. And so, number one, clarifying questions. Number two, possible shared values. Number three, shibboleths or versus red flags. Number four, good things to honor together. And then number five, humble subversion with the gospel of Jesus Christ. So any advice to me as I'm trying to apply the structure that you're giving me to my conversations with someone who applauds the terrible things that are happening?
Sure. First, we would think about clarifying questions like, you know, tell me what you mean when you say war, holy war, righteous war, God is on our side, send them to hell. Just find bits in there and just make sure that you give them an invitation or an opportunity to talk for a few paragraphs, what they just said in a slogan. Because it may be that I'm receiving that sloganeering and I'm defining it in my own imagination different than they would. So clarifying questions, tell me what you mean by that.
Hmm.
Uh, you know,
That's honoring to the person, right? I mean, like I don't want to just presume I know what you mean by that.
right. Yeah. Two, uh, thinking about shared values. I may ask a story of like, tell me why this matters to you. Tell me why America's war with Iran is something that you're giving a lot of thought to. And they may say something like, well, I just want safety for our future. You know, they're an evil empire. They need to be ended. Tell me why that matters to you, because I care about my kids, you know, whatever it might be. And almost always, in my experience, asking why this matters to you, you get to a core value that I also share. So
Hmm.
I can honor that. And I say, I share your value for safety in America, or I share your value for, you know, having righteousness and leadership. And then shibboleth would be like anything that communicates I'm not your enemy. So it's an old Bible word, but it communicates I'm not your enemy. So something like shibboleth might be a word or phrase that I can say to communicate I'm on your side. So like something like, you know, I honor the men and women who are fighting on our behalf in Iran, and I've got a lot of respect for the American armed services. Just to communicate what that does is, especially for folks who are taking in a steady stream of social media or you know, news media, they may be conditioned to think anyone who asks a critical question is my enemy and believes the opposite of me on everything. And so a shibboleth is
Hmm.
helpful to say, like, not only do we share values, but like I'm on your side on a lot of this stuff. Avoiding red flags would be the inverse of that. It's just avoiding anything that would signal I'm an enemy or I'm a threat. So, you know, something like, you know, the other day I was listening to NPR. Depending on my counterpart, they may view that with suspicion. So instead, I'll just say I was listening to the radio. And just to be thoughtful of, you know, is this thing that I'm saying uh, going to put a roadblock between my counterpart and I to move forward towards a deeper conversation? And when we're having values conversations, we're having heart to heart conversations. And I don't want a roadblock from some talk track, or I don't want my speech to create a roadblock. Now, if the roadblock is because we value different things, okay, but I don't want
Sure.
my lexicon, my rhetoric to be the roadblock, right?
Right.
So I might not say things like, well, social justice, or, you know, I'm woke. Like I probably wouldn't talk like that uh, unless my counterpart understood what I meant by it. I don't want them
Right.
thinking, you know, so avoiding red flags. And if you have to use a red flag, just define it and say stuff like, I know that this gets misinterpreted in the media all the time, but here's what I mean by it. And again, that's just deferring to their needs and their lexicon, which is an act of grace.
Hmm.
Uh, Honoring them for the things. So while I do not honor or value or even respect the statement that they just made, there is something honorable about the fact that they are devoting time to thinking about global politics and how that might impact our future. Because apathy is rampant. And so I might say to my counterpart, I'm not seeing the same thing you're seeing, or I'm not having that same response to what we just saw the Department of War do. In fact, I might be on a different side. But I just want to say I really respect you for devoting time to thinking about how the actions of our government leaders have downstream effects for future generations, because I know a lot of people just shrug their shoulders and they don't care. And so I respect you for devoting time. And again, I'm not seeing the same thing you're seeing, but I honor you for giving the time. And one thing that I think is key is if I cannot find anything honorable about them, that's a me problem, not a them problem. Uh, they
Wow,
they
that's important to
they
know.
they are fellow bearers of the image of God. There is something honorable about them.
Yes,
If I
because
can't,
both sides, you just want to see the other person as another and not somebody to honor.
exactly, yeah,
I'm just as guilty as that as they are the guilty of that.
yeah,
Everybody, we just like to. It's so much easier to win arguments when the other person isn't human.
yes. And if I can't articulate my counterpart's value or how I respect them, or something I can respect them for, I should say, uh, then I need to do some more internal work, because I may be thinking of myself more highly than I ought to think.
Hmm.
I may be thinking a bit arrogantly about my own capacities over this person. And so honoring them when I can is really less about them and more about me. Is my heart in the kind of space where I can show honor for the things that are honorable. And then the humble subversion bit is reintroducing Jesus to the conversation. So this is especially helpful for those committed to American Christian nationalism, as they say that they like Jesus and they like the Bible. They say the most of the time the problem is they're not really engaged it. So they have a high view of the Bible and a low engagement with it, which is a recipe for authoritarian abuse. That as long as the person's quoting Bible, I just believe them. And so what I would want to do in this case is to say, I'm not having that same response to, Department of War's statement or the fact that they prayed. In fact, I feel the opposite that you do, but I share these values with you. I honor you for doing it. And I wrestle personally with how do we pay attention to geopolitics? How do we think about warfare? How do we pursue safety as a people? I care about those things. I want those things. And follow the radical way of Jesus, who says a lot about violence. Uh, what do you think the teachings of Jesus how the teachings of Jesus would instruct us on thinking about warfare and blessing bullets and things like that? What do you think? And just to put them in a position to process once more, is Jesus shaping my imagination around this issue? And then if you're in a position to do so, to say, would you be up for doing like a 6-part study through the Gospel of Matthew about what Jesus might have to say? Like we can just look at all the spots where Jesus talks about violence and death and warfare or whatever. Uh, and again, I'm not trying to make them argue with me. I want them doing business with Jesus. And then there's this other bit, and this is the last bit. And this gets back to the 98% of the work is in me. Before I even have this conversation, I would invite people to pray a prayer that I hate. I hate this prayer. I don't want to tell people about it. I just dislike it, generally speaking. But if I can't pray this prayer with integrity before the meeting, I'm not in a position to have this meeting with my counterpart. And here's the prayer: Lord, what do you want to change in me through them?
Mm.
So if they're running their mouth about Department of War, blessing every bullet, whatever it might be, lizard people running the government, immigrants at the border, whatever the thing is, if I think that they have a lot to learn from me, but I have nothing to learn from them, then I am the savior in this conversation. I'm the one you need to be like. I want you to stop thinking your way and start thinking like me. And so I become the bar of that you need to meet. I become the paradigm that you need to adopt, and that's colonizing behavior. I want you to be like me, is what a colonizer says. But a missionary says, I want you to follow Jesus in the way that Jesus has made you to follow Jesus. And you can help me follow Jesus better too. And so, Lord, what do you want to change in me through them is the prayer that says, Lord, I also have a lot of blind spots and a lot to learn. And stuff is coming out of my mouth that's not in alignment with the gospel. And I also need correction. And so, Lord, what do you want to change in me through them? Puts into practice what grandma used to say, which is all ground is equal at the foot of the cross.
Right.
I think having the conversation from that aspect disarms both parties usually because I've been in heated conversations where it's like I'm going to win. I'm going to win. I'm going to defeat you in this conversation. That's I would say 90% of comment sections on social media. But for both sides, I think that that is a powerful way to go about it because a lot of people who are deep into Christian nationalism, they think, oh, well, people who disagree with me or who may be on the left politically or whatever they might label it as, like they're gonna come to fight and make me think the way they think. Um, and really, I like what you said. It's, hey, I'm not gonna try to. I don't need another me. I don't need
Right.
you to think like me. I need you to think like Jesus, and I need to think like Jesus. So help me, help you, help me. There's just that helpful cycle. So I really think it disarms the conversation. So if somebody is listening to this podcast and they're thinking, okay, yeah, this is just a bunch of leftist progressive Christianity or something
Right.
like that, we can tell them, hey, we're in this together. Let's have a conversation about it. Hopefully offline. Hopefully we can chat on the phone, have a real conversation, because it's always more healthy. So yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's a powerful way to move through the conversation.
Having some a greater desire for the relationship than the winning of the argument is a missionary move, right?
Yep.
It's that is contrary to the talking head pundits on cable news channels or alternative media. What we're trying to do is create a relationship where people can meet Jesus, and I need to meet Jesus. Missionaries are the most humble people in the world. They should be. They're not going into some foreign country saying, "I've got it all," and my job here is to colonize you. They're there just to say, "Hey, we met this amazing person named Jesus. You want to meet him too? This is amazing. You should consider this." And it's to people who have no idea who Jesus is, but we're living in a world where people think they have an idea what Jesus is. And
Right.
so, boy, that makes it an incredibly interesting deconstruction before we can reconstruct. We talk a lot about deconstruction in evangelicals, but there's a deconstruction that needs to be done with Christian nationalists as well.
Yeah.
Any other last thoughts, Caleb, for us?
Galatians 6:1 and 2 says, if any of y'all are caught up in a transgression, y'all who are spiritually mature seek to restore that person with a gentle spirit and watch out for your own self, lest you too be tempted. Therefore, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ, the law of Christ being love God and love neighbor. And what Galatians 6:1 and 2 reminds us of is that staying in relationship with those with whom we disagree and doing the work of gentle restoration is a burden to carry. So when we think about loving our American Christian nationalist neighbor, it is weight. I mean, it will feel heavy. It is a burden to stay in that relationship. And I'm not talking about harm. I'm not talking about abuse. Those are really, when that happens, we need to set up boundaries with people and sometimes just avoid folks altogether. But just the kind of normal pain that comes with staying in the relationship is a way that we can put into practice love my neighbor as myself. And so I say that to encourage you that if you're feeling weighed down in the relationship, carrying it is an act of love and following the teaching of Jesus. And Bob, to your point, fighting to stay, not fighting to win an argument, but fighting to stay in relationship is a means of loving our neighbors ourselves. And sometimes people change. I mean, one of the central truths of Christianity is that people can change. The Apostle Paul would be a great example that we think about when we read the book of Acts. And so who knows when the Spirit's going to work in changing our counterparts. I can focus on asking the Spirit to change me, and then following that into whatever conversations I find myself. And I would invite those listening not to define the win as they changed their mind, because you can't control that, but rather to define the win as, was I acting like Jesus? Was I following the Spirit? Was I representing the gospel well in that meeting? Because I can control those things. And to trust that the Lord's going to do the convicting work when the Lord's going to do the convicting work.
Yeah. Thanks for taking time to come back and be with us again, Caleb.
Yes,
Appreciate
my
that.
pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yep.